The clock in Samuel Blackwood's study chimed midnight as he pored over the ranch ledgers, the numbers blurring before his tired eyes. 20 years he'd been building this empire in the Colorado Territory, 20 years of careful planning, strategic investments, and ruthless determination that had transformed him from a penniless drifter into one of the most powerful men in 3 counties. Samuel set down his pen and rubbed his temples, feeling every one of his 45 years in the ache. Behind his eyes, the Blackwood Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime grazing land, employed over 60 men, and generated more wealth than he'd ever dreamed possible in his younger days. He was respected, feared, and envied in equal measure, exactly as he'd planned. But success, he'd learned, was a prison of its own making. The higher a man climbed, the farther he had to fall. And Samuel Blackwood had secrets buried deep enough to bring down everything he'd built. A soft knock at his study door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting to see his foreman with some late-night emergency requiring his attention. Instead, Maria Gonzalez, his longtime housekeeper, entered with an expression of concern that immediately put him on alert. Maria had been with him for 15 years, since shortly after he'd established the ranch, and nothing rattled her usually calm demeanor. "Sigor Blackwood," she said, her accented English carefully controlled. "There is someone here to see you at midnight. Tell whoever it is to come back during civilized hours. I think you should see this person now, Sigor." Maria's dark eyes held something that might have been sympathy. She says she knows about Texas." The blood in Samuel's veins turned to ice water. Texas? No one was supposed to know about Texas. He'd buried that chapter of his life so deep that sometimes he almost convinced himself it had happened to someone else. "What does she look like?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the roaring in his ears. "She wears a mask, Sigor. Black silk, covers half her face." But her voice, Maria paused, struggling with something. "Her voice sounds familiar, though I cannot place it." Samuel felt the carefully constructed walls of his new life beginning to crack. "Where is she?" "In the parlor. I offered refreshment, but she declined. She only asked for you." Samuel stood slowly, every muscle in his body tense with a combination of dread and dark anticipation. 20 years of wondering when this moment would come. 20 years of looking over his shoulder. And now it was here. "Thank you, Maria. You can retire for the evening. I'll handle this." Maria nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Sigor, be careful. There is something about this woman, something dangerous." Samuel almost smiled at that. If this visitor was who he suspected, danger was the least of his concerns. Some sins had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran or how much you changed. The parlor was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the expensive furniture Samuel had imported from back east. In one of the high-backed chairs sat a figure that made his breath catch in his throat. She was smaller than he remembered, more delicate, but there was no mistaking the proud set of her shoulders or the way she held her head. The black silk mask covered the upper half of her face, leaving only her mouth and chin visible. But those were enough. He would have known those lips anywhere, even after 20 years. "Hello, Samuel," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it, low, musical, with just a hint of accent that spoke of aristocratic Mexican heritage. "Or should I call you Sigor Blackwood now, Isabella?" Her name came out as barely a whisper. 20 years of guilt and regret and longing compressed into 4 syllables. Isabella Valdez rose from her chair with fluid grace, and Samuel could see that age had only refined her beauty. She wore an elegant, black traveling dress that emphasized her still slender figure, and her unmasked features showed the fine lines of a woman who had lived through both joy and sorrow since he'd last seen her. "You recognize me, then?" "I wasn't sure you would. 20 years is a long time." "Not long enough," Samuel said, then immediately regretted the harshness in his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Isabella moved closer, and Samuel caught a whiff of the jasmine perfume she'd always worn. "And you have every right to mean it, after what happened." "Isabella, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, Samuel, did you really think you could disappear so completely, change your name, move to a different territory, build a new life, and expect the past to simply fade away? I hoped it would. Hopes are dangerous things. They make us believe in possibilities that don't exist. Isabella moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of his ranch. You've done well for yourself. This is quite an empire you've built. Isabella, why are you here? She turned back to him, and even with the mask hiding her eyes, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. Because, my dear Samuel, your past is about to catch up with you, and I thought you deserved a warning. Samuel felt his carefully controlled world tilt on its axis. What do you mean? I mean that there are people looking for you. People who know what really happened in San Antonio 20 years ago. People who know what you did. The words hit Samuel like physical blows. San Antonio. The job that had gone wrong. The death that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. The reason he'd fled Texas in the middle of the night and never looked back. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Everyone who knew about that is dead. Not everyone. Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade. You see, Samuel, you made a mistake 20 years ago. You assumed that because you killed Miguel Herrera, his family would simply accept his death and move on. You didn't count on his younger brother spending the next 2 decades searching for the truth. Carlos, Samuel breathed, remembering the intense young man who had worshipped his older brother. Carlos Herrera has spent 20 years building his own empire, his own network of informants and investigators. He never forgot what happened to Miguel, and he never stopped looking for the man who killed him. Samuel sank into a chair, feeling older than his years. How much does he know? Everything. Your real name, your history, your current location. He knows that Samuel Garrett became Samuel Blackwood. He knows about this ranch, your business dealings, your reputation in the territory. Isabella paused, letting the implications sink in. He knows you're the man who shot his brother in the back during that bank robbery in San Antonio. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Samuel said quietly. The job was supposed to be simple in and out. No one gets hurt. Miguel was supposed to watch the door, not try to be a hero. But he did try to be a hero, and you killed him for it. Samuel looked up at the woman who had once been the center of his universe, the woman he'd loved more than his own life. Isabella, I need you to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Her voice was cold as winter steel. You killed the man I was going to marry. You destroyed my life, shattered my family, and then disappeared like a coward into the night. The words hit Samuel like bullets, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. You were going to marry Miguel 3 weeks after the robbery. We had already spoken to the priest, chosen the flowers, planned our future. Isabella's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown since arriving. He was going to buy a small ranch with his share of the money from that job. We were going to raise children, grow old together. Isabella, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I never would have, wouldn't you? She moved closer, and Samuel could see tears glittering behind the mask. You were always ruthless, Samuel. Always willing to do whatever it took to get what you wanted. That's what I loved about you, and that's what destroyed everything I cared about. Samuel felt 20 years of carefully suppressed guilt come crashing down on him. I loved you too. More than anything, losing you was worse than losing your life. Isabella laughed bitterly. At least you had a choice in the matter. Miguel didn't. I didn't. We all paid the price for your ambition. What do you want from me? Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. Carlos will be here in 3 days. He's bringing evidence, witnesses, and enough men to ensure you don't disappear. Again, he intends to take you back to Texas to face justice for what you did. And you, what do you intend? Isabella reached up and slowly untied the silk mask, letting it fall away to reveal the rest of her face. She was still beautiful, but Samuel could see the lines that sorrow had carved around her eyes. The way 20 years of grief had refined her features into something harder, more determined. I intend to watch, she said simply. I intend to be there when you face the consequences of what you did. I intend to see justice done for Miguel, even if it's 20 years too late. Samuel stared at the woman he had once loved with desperate intensity, seeing in her face the ruin of everything he had once held dear. Isabella, if there was any way I could undo what happened. But there isn't, is there? She picked up her mask and retied it, once again becoming the mysterious stranger who had arrived in his parlor. There never is. We make our choices, Samuel, and then we live with them, or in Miguel's case, we die with them. She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. You have 3 days to put your affairs in order. 3 days to decide whether you'll face this with whatever honor you have left, or whether you'll run again like the coward you've always been. Isabella, wait, but she was already gone, disappearing into the night as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving Samuel alone with the weight of 20 years of buried guilt and the knowledge that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. He sat in the dim parlor until dawn, staring at the chair where she had sat, remembering the woman she had been and confronting the ghost he had made of her. Tomorrow he would have to decide whether to run or stay, whether to fight or surrender, whether to face his past like a man or flee from it like the outlaw he had once been. But tonight, he would mourn for what might have been, for the life he had destroyed in pursuit of the life he thought he wanted, and for the woman whose love he had lost through his own fatal choices. The past, Samuel Blackwood was learning, had a way of collecting its debts, and after 20 years of running, it had finally caught up with him. Samuel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow, and his Colt .45 on the desk before him, wrestling with demons he'd thought were long buried. As the sun rose over his empire, painting the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and crimson, he made his decision. He wouldn't run, not this time. By noon, Samuel had summoned his foreman, his banker, and his lawyer to the ranch house. To each, he gave careful instructions about the disposition of his affairs, the continuation of ranch operations, and the distribution of his wealth should something happen to him. He signed papers, transferred assets, and prepared for a reckoning. 20 years in the making. Maria watched these preparations with growing concern, her dark eyes following his movements as he methodically put his life in order. Sigur, she said finally, as he sealed the last of his legal documents. What is happening? Who was that woman? Samuel looked at this loyal woman who had been more family to him than employee, who had asked no questions about his past and accepted his occasional nightmares and dark moods as part of the man she served. Her name is Isabella Valdez, he said quietly, and she's here because I once did something terrible, something that destroyed her life and the lives of people she loved, and now it's time to pay for what I did. That evening, as Samuel sat on his porch watching the sunset paint his land in brilliant colors, he heard the sound of approaching riders, not one or two, but many a small army moving with military precision toward his ranch house. Isabella had been accurate in her timing. Carlos Herrera had come. Samuel stood as the riders approached, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. He counted 15 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of professionals who had come to finish a job that had been 20 years in the making. At their head rode a man Samuel recognized despite the passage of time. Carlos Herrera had grown from the intense young man Samuel remembered into a figure of quiet authority. His black hair was streaked with silver now, his face lined by years of sun and determination, but his dark eyes held the same fire that had burned in his brother Miguel. The riders formed a loose semicircle round the porch, but it was Carlos who dismounted and approached alone. He moved with the confidence of a man who had spent 2 decades preparing for this moment. Samuel Garrett, Carlos said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Also known as Samuel Blackwood, owner of this ranch, respected citizen of the Colorado Territory. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Also the man who murdered my brother in San Antonio 20 years ago. Carlos, Samuel nodded. Acknowledgement. You've grown into the man Miguel always said you would become. Don't speak his name. Carlos's voice was deadly quiet. You lost that right when you put a bullet in his back. Samuel felt the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. I've carried that guilt for 20 years. Not a day has passed that I haven't regretted what happened. Regret. Carlos laughed harshly. You regret getting caught. You regret having to face consequences. You don't regret what you did, or you would have come forward long ago. You're wrong. Samuel's voice was steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. I regret every second of that day. I regret taking the job. I regret bringing Miguel into it. And I regret the choice I made when everything went wrong. Then why didn't you turn yourself in? Why didn't you face justice like a man instead of running like a coward? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain 20 years of cowardice and self-preservation. Because I was young and stupid and scared. Because I thought I could outrun what I'd done. Because I convinced myself that Miguel's death was an accident, a moment of panic in a situation that had spiraled out of control. It wasn't an accident. Carlos's voice was implacable. You shot him in the back because he tried to stop you from killing that bank guard. You murdered my brother because he grew a conscience and you didn't. The accusation hit Samuel like a physical blow because it was true in the chaos of the robbery. When the bank guard had reached for his gun, Miguel had stepped between them, trying to end the violence before it escalated. And Samuel, high on adrenaline and fear, had seen only betrayal and weakness. You're right, Samuel said quietly. That's exactly what happened. The admission seemed to surprise Carlos, who had clearly expected denials and justifications. You admit it. I admit it. Miguel tried to be the better man, tried to stop unnecessary killing, and I shot him for it. I've lived with that knowledge. For 20 years, Carlos, it's eaten away at everything good I might have been. And yet you build all this. Carlos gestured at the ranch, the wealth, the empire Samuel had created. You built a life on my brother's blood. I built a prison. Samuel corrected. Every success, every dollar, every acre of this land that's all been meaningless because it was paid for with Miguel's life. I've been a dead man walking for 20 years, just too much of a coward to lie down. Carlos studied Samuel's face, searching for deception and finding only weary honesty. What about Isabella? What was she to you? Samuel's breath caught. You know about Isabella. I know you loved her. I know she loved you. I know you destroyed her as surely as you killed Miguel. Is she? Samuel couldn't finish the question. Is she what? Married? Happy? Alive? Carlos's smile was cruel. She's alive, if you can call it that. She never married, never found love again, never got over what you did to her world. She spent 20 years in mourning for the life you stole from her. The words cut deeper than any knife. Samuel had sometimes allowed himself to hope that Isabella had found happiness, had moved on, had built a life that didn't revolve around the tragedy he'd created. Learning otherwise was almost unbearable. Where is she now? Close, watching, waiting to see if you'll die like the coward you've lived as, or if you'll finally find some courage in your last moments. Samuel nodded, understanding. What do you want from me? Carlos, confession, apology, blood, justice. The justice Miguel never got. The justice Isabella never got. The justice our family never got. And what does justice look like to you? Carlos was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 20 years of planning. You're going to come with me back to Texas. You're going to confess to what you did, publicly, before witnesses. You're going to face trial for Miguel's murder, and you're going to accept whatever sentence you receive. And if I refuse, then my men and I will kill you here and now, and I'll tell everyone you died resisting arrest. Your empire will crumble, your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll be remembered as the outlaw you always were. Samuel looked around at the land he'd spent 20 years building, at the house where he'd lived in splendid isolation, at the mountains that had been his sanctuary from the consequences of his past. Then he looked at Carlos Herrera, Miguel's brother, Isabella's lost-loved sibling, the man who had spent decades seeking justice for the dead. If I come with you, Samuel said quietly, if I confess and face trial, what happens to Isabella? What do you mean? I mean, will she find peace? Will she be able to move on? To find some kind of happiness? Or will watching me hang just add more darkness to a life I've already ruined? Carlos's expression softened slightly, as if he hadn't expected such a question. I don't know. That's for her to decide. Samuel nodded. then did something that surprised everyone present, including himself. He unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the porch rail, then held out his hands. "I'll come with you," he said. "I'll confess to what I did, face trial, and accept whatever consequences come. Miguel deserves that much justice, and Isabella deserves to see this ended." Just like that, Carlos seemed almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. "Just like that, I'm tired, Carlos, tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of living with what I did. If facing the truth finally gives Isabella some peace, then it's the least I can do." As Carlos motioned for his men to secure the prisoner, Samuel caught a glimpse of movement in the trees beyond the ranch yard. A figure in black, watching from the shadows. Isabella, witnessing the moment when her 20-year quest for justice finally began to unfold. Samuel looked toward her hidden form and mouthed a single word, "Sorry." Then he allowed himself to be bound and loaded onto a horse, beginning the journey back to Texas and the reckoning he'd been running from for half his adult life. Behind him, his empire stood empty and silent, a monument to the futility of trying to outrun the past. Ahead lay San Antonio, confession, trial, and very likely death. But for the first time in 20 years, Samuel Blackwood felt something approaching peace. The running was over, the lies were ending, and maybe, just maybe, Isabella would finally be able to heal from the wounds he'd inflicted on her soul. The past had finally caught up with him, and Samuel discovered that he was ready to face it. The courthouse in San Antonio was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and pressed against the walls to witness the trial of the century. Samuel Blackwood, or Samuel Garrett, as the newspapers now called him, sat in the defendant's chair with a composure that surprised everyone who had expected to see a broken man. 3 weeks had passed since his arrest in Colorado. 3 weeks of confinement and preparation for this moment. His lawyer, a competent man from Denver who had made the journey to Texas, had repeatedly urged him to mount a defense, to claim self-defense or temporary insanity or any of the dozens of legal strategies that might save his life. Samuel had refused them all. He would tell the truth, the whole truth, and let justice take its course from his seat. He could see Carlos Herrera in the front row, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. Beside him sat an elderly woman Samuel recognized as Miguel's mother. She had aged greatly in 20 years, but her eyes still burned with the same fire he remembered. Other members of the Herrera family filled the surrounding seats, a wall of faces united in their desire for justice. But it was the figure in the back corner that held most of Samuel's attention. Isabella sat alone, still wearing the black silk mask that concealed her identity from the curious crowd. She had been present every day of the trial, a silent witness to the slow unraveling of the case that had consumed her life for 2 decades. The prosecution calls Samuel Garrett to the stand, announced the district attorney, a young man with political ambitions who saw this case as his ticket to higher office. Samuel rose and walked to the witness stand with steady steps. He had requested to testify on his own behalf against his lawyer's strenuous objections. There were things that needed to be said, truths that needed to be spoken, regardless of the consequences. After being sworn in, Samuel looked out at the packed courtroom and began to speak in a clear, strong voice. 20 years ago, I was a different man with a different name, living a different life. I was Samuel Garrett, a small-time outlaw who thought the world owed him something better than what he'd been given. I was angry, desperate, and stupid enough to believe that robbing banks was a path to the life I wanted. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Samuel's calm, forthright manner was not what anyone had expected from a man on trial for his life. Miguel Herrera was my partner, my friend, and probably the best man I've ever known. He was everything I wasn't: honorable, thoughtful, concerned about others. He only participated in our criminal activities to provide for his family and to save money for his future with the woman he loved. Samuel's eyes found Isabella in the crowd, and even with the mask, he could see her stiffen at his words. On the day of the San Antonio job, everything went wrong. The bank was supposed to be empty except for one guard. Instead, there were 3 employees and 2 customers. Miguel wanted to call it off, said it was too dangerous, too likely to end in bloodshed. I overruled him. That was my first mistake. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, hanging on every word. When we entered the bank, the guard reached for his weapon. Miguel stepped between us, trying to prevent violence. He said, "Nobody needs to die for money." He was right, of course. Miguel was always right about the things that mattered. Samuel's voice caught slightly, but he continued, "I shot him, not in self-defense, not in the heat of battle, but because I was angry that he was interfering with what I saw as my chance at a better life. I shot the man who was trying to save lives, who was trying to be the voice of conscience in a situation that had already gone too far." A woman in the gallery, Miguel's sister, Samuel realized, let out a sob. Carlos Herrera's face remained impassive, but his hands were clenched into fists. After Miguel fell, I completed the robbery. I took the money, left my friend dying on the floor, and fled. I convinced myself that it had been necessary, that Miguel had betrayed me, that I had done what I had to do to survive. For 20 years, I told myself those lies. The district attorney leaned forward. "Mr. Garrett, are you confessing to the premeditated murder of Miguel Herrera?" "I'm confessing to the murder of the best man I ever knew, committed by the worst man I ever was. Whether it was premeditated is for you to decide. But I killed him, and I've spent 20 years trying to outrun that truth." Samuel turned back to the courtroom. "I built a new life in Colorado. I became successful, respected, wealthy. But none of it mattered, because it was all built on Miguel's blood. Every night, I saw his face. Every success felt like theft. Every moment of happiness was poisoned by the knowledge of what I had done." "Why didn't you turn yourself in?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I was a coward. Because I was selfish. Because I thought I could somehow balance the scales by living a good life, by helping people, by being the man Miguel would have wanted me to be. But redemption doesn't work that way. You can't earn forgiveness for murder by being nice to your neighbors." Samuel looked directly at Isabella now, speaking to her as much as to the court. "I destroyed more than just Miguel's life that day. I destroyed the woman he loved, the family who depended on him, the future he was trying to build. I robbed not just a bank, but all the lives that were connected to his. Is there anything else you'd like to say?" the prosecutor asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. "Miguel Herrera was going to marry the woman he loved. He was going to buy a ranch, raise children, contribute to his community. He would have been a good husband, a good father, a good citizen. Instead, he's dead because I valued money more than I value human life." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "I can't bring Miguel back. I can't undo the pain I've caused his family. I can't give Isabella back the life I stole from her. But I can finally tell the truth about what happened, and I can face the consequences of my actions like the man Miguel tried to teach me to be." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brief. What was there to challenge in a complete confession? The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree, the judge sentenced Samuel to death by hanging, to be carried out in 30 days. As the courtroom erupted in noise, some cheers, some sobs, much shouting. Samuel's eyes found Isabella one last time. She sat perfectly still, and though he couldn't see her expression behind the mask, something in her posture suggested not triumph, but exhaustion. That night, in his jail cell, Samuel received an unexpected visitor. Isabella came alone, without the mask, for the first time since arriving in Colorado. Her face, revealed fully in the lamplight, showed the toll that 20 years of grief and anger had taken. She was still beautiful, but it was the beauty of a flower that had been pressed between the pages of a book, preserved, but no longer truly alive. "Why?" she asked without preamble. "Why confess so completely? Why make it easy for them to kill you?" Samuel gripped the bars of his cell, drinking in the sight of her unmasked face. "Because Miguel deserved the truth. Because you deserved to hear it. Because living with the lie was killing me slowly anyway. Do you think confession makes up for what you did? No, nothing could ever make up for what I did. But at least now the truth is known. At least Miguel's family can have closure. At least you can." "Can what?" "Move on. Find happiness. Forget." Isabella's voice was bitter. Samuel, you destroyed my life 20 years ago. Watching you hang won't give it back to me. Then what will? Isabella was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know. I thought justice would be enough. I thought watching you pay for what you did would heal something inside me. But now I realize that I gave up my life to your crime, just as surely as Miguel did. I've spent 20 years focused on revenge instead of living. Isabella, if I could change what happened, but you can't. None of us can. Miguel is still dead. I'm still alone. 20 years are still gone. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. You know what the worst part is? I still love you. After everything you did, after everything you destroyed, part of me still loves the man you were before that day. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. I loved you too, Samuel said quietly, more than my own life. Losing you was a worse punishment than anything the law could devise. Love wasn't enough to stop you from killing Miguel. No, it wasn't. And I'll regret that failure for whatever time I have left. Isabella studied his face through the bars, searching for something she couldn't name. Are you afraid to die? Terrified, Samuel admitted, but also relieved. The running is over. The lies are finished. For the first time in 20 years, I'm exactly where I belong. 2 weeks later, Isabella visited again. This time, she brought news. I'm leaving, she said, going back to Mexico, to my family's ranch. I want to try to build something positive. With whatever years I have left, that's good. That's what you should do. I wanted to ask you something before I go. Do you believe in forgiveness? Samuel considered the question carefully. I believe in the possibility of it. I hope for it, but I don't expect it, and I don't think I deserve it. What if I told you that I forgive you? Samuel's breath caught. Do you? Isabella was quiet for a long time. I'm trying to, for my own sake, not yours. I'm tired of carrying this hatred. It's poisoned 20 years of my life, and I won't let it poison whatever years I have left. Isabella, don't thank me. Don't think this changes anything. Miguel is still dead. Our future is still destroyed, and you're still going to hang. But I refuse to let your crime define the rest of my life. She stood to leave, then paused. Samuel, in your new life in Colorado, did you ever try to make amends? Did you ever help anyone? I tried. I built schools, helped families in need, treated my workers fairly. But it was never enough. It could never be enough. Isabella nodded. Miguel would have appreciated that. He always believed people could change, could become better than they were. I wish I had been worthy of that belief. So do I, Isabella said sadly. So do I. A week later, Samuel Blackwood walked to the gallows with steady steps, carrying the weight of his crimes, but also the strange peace that came from finally facing the truth. In the crowd, he saw Carlos Herrera, watching with grim satisfaction. He saw Miguel's family, their faces showing various degrees of pain and closure. But Isabella was not there. She had returned to Mexico to try to build a life from the ashes of the one he had destroyed. As the noose was placed around his neck, Samuel thought about redemption, about justice, about the price of the choices we make. He thought about Miguel, who had tried to save lives and lost his own. He thought about Isabella, who had loved him and lost everything because of that love. And he thought about the strange mercy of finally being able to pay for his crimes, even if that payment could never truly balance the scales of justice. Samuel Blackwood died as he had lived his last years carrying the weight of his choices, but no longer running from their consequences. Whether that constituted redemption was a question for judges higher than any earthly court. But in dying, he finally gave Isabella permission to live again. And sometimes, that was the most mercy any of us could hope for. Thank you for following Samuel and Isabella's haunting journey through guilt, justice, and the complex nature of redemption. This powerful story reminds us that our past actions shape our present reality, that running from consequences only delays their arrival, and that sometimes facing the truth is the only path to peace, even when that peace comes at the ultimate cost. If this tale of buried secrets, lost love, and the price of justice moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories about the weight of our choices and the possibility of redemption. Your support helps us continue exploring these profound themes about human nature. morality, and the courage it takes to face our deepest regrets. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are many more thought-provoking adventures waiting for you.